Hello, my name's Leora. My boss screamed that I cost him $30,000. He spit near my feet, called me worthless trash, all because I stopped to help an old man stranded in a storm. But that wasn't even the worst part. At home, my sister told the whole family I got fired for stealing time. No one asked if it was true. No one cared. I thought I was walking into a firing. Instead, I stepped into a boardroom and saw the man I had saved sitting at the head of the table. You ever wonder what it takes to be seen when your whole life you've been invisible? The wind nipped at my face as I stepped outside, my coat too thin for the cold creeping in from the edges of November. The silence of the night was thicker than the noise of the dinner I had just escaped. I pulled the door shut behind me and walked slowly to my car, my shoes crunching across the gravel. If even my family thinks I'm worthless, how long until my boss says the same? Sunday didn't feel like a day of rest anymore. I spent it doing what I usually did, washing clothes nobody noticed I wore, running errands no one thanked me for, and preparing for another week of being invisible. I went through my closet that morning, pausing at a navy blouse I hadn't worn in years. It was one of the few pieces that made me feel capable, strong, even. But I put it back. I didn't want to risk looking like I was trying too hard. By 5:30, I was walking up the steps of my parents' home in Scranton. The house looked the same as it always had. Same shutters, same chipped walkway, same porch light that flickered like it had better places to be. Inside, the smell of roast chicken and mashed potatoes filled the air. For anyone else, it might have smelled like comfort. For me, it smelled like obligation. Everyone was already seated when I came in. Callista was at the head of the table, not because she was the eldest, but because she had claimed that spot years ago and no one dared contest it. She wore her usual professional smile, a crisp cream blouse that looked like it had been steamed 5 minutes ago, and her hair swept into that perfect bun she probably paid someone to do. Her husband Jason sat beside her, nodding attentively as she spoke. Across from them, my dad chuckled politely. Mom passed Callista the butter like it was her crown. I slid quietly into the empty seat at the far end, next to the wall where the thermostat used to be. No one looked up. I poured myself a glass of water. So, Callista said, placing her fork down and dabbing her mouth. We finalized the school's grant proposal on Friday. Superintendent said it was the cleanest writing he's seen in years. He actually suggested I train the other staff on how to draft future proposals. Of course he did. Jason nodded with practiced admiration. You're a powerhouse, babe. Really impressive, Mom chimed in, slicing her chicken. Honestly, we always knew you were built for leadership. Dad turned to Callista with that glint in his eye he used to have when I brought home good grades in high school, back when I was still someone. Maybe we should get you on the school board, huh? Callista waved a hand modestly. Well, let's see what the district says. I wouldn't say no. The rest of dinner followed that rhythm, Callista's voice filling the room like a news anchor, everyone else playing supporting cast. I kept chewing, swallowing, waiting for a lull in conversation. When it came, I cleared my throat. Work's been intense lately. We're short 2 drivers, and I had to help coordinate an emergency delivery to Chicago. Oh, that reminds me, Callista interrupted. One of my students' parents is from Chicago. He brought in deep dish pizza for the whole class on Friday. So sweet. The kids were bouncing off the walls, though. And that was it. My story. Dismissed. Swallowed by cheese and crust. I pushed my food around the plate. I shouldn't have expected anything. The pattern was too old now to be surprising. I had my role to play. Nod, smile, fade. When dessert was brought out, I overheard Callista showing Mom an email on her phone. Mom squinted, then laughed. Oh, that's funny. You accidentally wrote Laura instead of Lyora on the dinner invite. I looked up. I just used the autofill from last year, Callista said, shrugging. Must have saved wrong. Sorry, sis. I forced a chuckle. It's fine. But it wasn't. My own sister didn't know how to spell my name, and my mother laughed. I should have stayed quiet. But something in me snapped. Actually, I said, my voice low but firm. I've been working 12-hour shifts since we lost 2 drivers. I managed a 3-hour reroute that saved us almost 15 grand in penalties last month. Not that anyone here ever asks. There was a pause. For a split second, I thought maybe they'd see me. Callista set her fork down again. Leora, look, I don't mean to be rude, but we all have our own stress. Jason's working 6 days a week. I'm managing 2 departments and mentoring new teachers. It's not always about you. And then, the line I'd never forget. In this family, you're just a shadow. Stop acting like you matter. The table went silent. No one said anything. Not Dad, not Mom, not Jason. The mashed potatoes on my plate looked blurred through the sudden sting in my eyes. I stood up, took my dish to the sink, and rinsed it. My hands shook. I didn't look back when I grabbed my coat. The cold air outside hit me harder this time. I fumbled for my car keys, gripping them like they were the only proof I existed. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard for a long time before turning the ignition. I didn't cry. I'd already cried that week, and last week, and the week before. Instead, I whispered to no one, maybe I am just a shadow, but even shadows stretch when the sun hits them right. The next morning started before the sun did. I rolled out of bed with that same weight in my chest that had followed me home from the dinner. My coat still smelled faintly like roast chicken and resignation. The air outside was sharp, as if the sky itself had overheard what Callista had said and now wanted to slice through me for daring to believe it. The depot parking lot was already packed when I pulled in. Semi-trucks idled like restless beasts, drivers shuffled with half-closed eyes, and someone spilled coffee on the steps again. Mondays had a rhythm. A grating, diesel-drenched rhythm. I hadn't even made it through the door when I heard Garrick's voice tearing through the air. I don't care what he said. Your job isn't to think, it's to deliver. He was barking at one of the newer warehouse guys, a kid barely 20, shoulders curled inward like he was trying to fold himself out of existence. Garrick didn't notice me slip past. Inside, the break room had a lingering smell of burnt toast and microwaved egg. I dropped my bag by the lockers and grabbed the old thermos I'd forgotten to wash all weekend. No time now. I took a sip anyway. Lukewarm, bitter. Riley! I froze. Garrick's voice, louder now. He wasn't done yet. I turned to find him standing in the doorway to his office, tie already half loosened, face flushed. He pointed to me like I was a toddler who'd colored on the walls. In, now. I walked in, closed the door gently behind me. He didn't sit. Instead, he walked to his desk, pulled a silver wristwatch from the top drawer, and slapped it flat on the surface. Do you know what this is? I raised an eyebrow, confused. A watch? He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a growl. It's money. Every tick, every second. That's what you cost me when you're not efficient. You want to keep this job? You treat time like cash. Understood? I nodded slowly, already feeling my throat tighten. One late delivery, one delay, one act of self-righteous nonsense. He jabbed a finger toward me. And you'll be out on your ass, and don't expect a reference. There it was, the hammer, the unspoken threat behind every conversation here. You're lucky to be here, so don't screw it up. I muttered. Understood. Garrick leaned back, arms folded. Then get on the road. Route 7. Rain's coming in. Chicago Depot by dawn. No excuses. He didn't say goodbye, just turned away and waved me off like I was another clipboard. Back outside, I climbed into the cab of my assigned rig. She was older, louder, but dependable, like a weary friend who always showed up. I rubbed the dashboard once before turning the key. The road stretched ahead like a gray ribbon through endless hills. My route took me through small towns tucked between tree-covered ridges, places where diners still had neon signs and motel owners lived behind the front desk. I passed them all, watching headlights blur into taillights. By the time dusk crept in, the clouds had started their quiet gathering above. Wisps at first, then an undeniable mass rolling across the sky like it had something to prove. Around 9 p.m., the rain began. Slow, persistent taps on the windshield, like someone testing the glass for weakness. I kept driving. The farther I went, the harder it hit. Wipers on high, I leaned forward in my seat, scanning for brake lights or hazards. The world outside had turned into streaks of gray and orange. There's a strange sort of solitude that settles in when you're driving in weather like that. A heavy, endless silence that wraps around your thoughts until all you can hear is yourself. I thought about Garrick's face, the way his words snapped in my ears like broken twigs. I thought about Callista, her perfect posture, the smug smile she wore when she told me I was just a shadow. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, and then I saw them. Hazard lights, faint and flickering ahead, right at the bend where the trees curved in and visibility dropped to almost nothing. I eased off the gas, blinked rain off the windshield. The lights weren't moving. As I got closer, I could make out the outline of a sedan. Dark, older, hood up, steam rising. The car was angled awkwardly off the shoulder, one tire flat, the other spinning slightly like it hadn't given up yet. And there he was, an old man, drenched through, one hand raised in the air, the other clutching something close to his chest. I slowed. It wasn't protocol. Garrick's voice echoed in my head. No unscheduled stops, liability, delay, termination. But the man, he looked so small out there, so completely at the mercy of the storm. I switched on my flashers and slowed further, straining to see what he was holding. As I crept past, my headlights caught it, a photograph, laminated and worn, of a young girl, smiling, missing teeth, pigtails tied in pink. My rig rolled past him by about 50 feet. I pulled over, engine humming. My fingers hovered over the gear shift. This wasn't my problem. That was what Garrick would say, what Callista would say. But as I sat there, staring at the blurry edges of the storm, one thought refused to leave me. What good is my job if I drive past a life? I reached for the door handle. I didn't hesitate. I opened the cab door and stepped down into the storm. The rain was unforgiving, slicing sideways through the beam of my headlights. My boots sank into the soft shoulder of the road as I hurried toward him. The man looked up, startled at first, then relieved. Up close, he was smaller than I expected. His coat was soaked through, clinging to his arms. His white hair lay flat against his forehead, and his shoes, dress shoes, completely inappropriate for this kind of weather, were caked in mud. He clutched the photograph with both hands like it was a lifeline. "Are you okay?" I shouted over the downpour. He nodded, but the motion was shaky. The car just stopped. No power. "My phone doesn't work out here. Do you have someone coming?" He shook his head slowly. "No signal. And this road's dead at night. You're the first car I've seen in an hour." I looked down at the photo. A little girl, maybe 6, smiling in a way only children can. A gap in her teeth, curls around her ears, eyes bright with the kind of joy I hadn't felt in months. "She's my granddaughter," he said, following my gaze. "I promised her I'd be there by morning for her birthday." I closed my eyes for half a second. Garrick's voice echoed like thunder in my head. "Every tick is money. That's your worth here." I opened them again and exhaled. "There's a motel 15 miles from here," I said. "I can tow you there. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You'll be safe." You do that?" "Yeah," I replied. "I'd do that." I jogged back to the truck, opened the toolbox behind the cab, and yanked out the tow chains. It wasn't the first time I'd hooked up a dead vehicle on the side of a road, but it was the first time I was risking my job to do it. My hands worked quickly despite the cold, the metal slick in my grip. The whole process took about 15 minutes. He helped where he could, but his joints didn't move like mine. I could see that he hated being in the way, which made me move faster. When everything was secure, I climbed back into the driver's seat and watched the sedan's headlights bob slightly in the mirror. It was strange how one decision, one deviation from the rulebook could feel both terrifying and completely right at the same time. The drive to the motel was slow, the road was slick, and I had to keep my speed low to avoid fishtailing with the added weight. At one point, my hands cramped from gripping the wheel so tightly. When we reached the turnoff, the vacancy sign glowed red against the rain. The parking lot was empty. I pulled around to the front and unhooked his car, my back and shoulders sore from tension and the cold. He stepped out of the car and approached my window. His hands trembled as he pulled out a leather wallet, soggy and worn. "I don't have much," he said, trying to hand me a few crumpled bills. "But please, let me give you something." I looked at the money, then at him. "Keep it," I said. "Just get inside. Get warm." He paused. People don't usually stop anymore, especially not at night, not in weather like this. I offered a tired smile. Maybe people should. He stared at me for a moment, eyes gleaming behind thick glasses. "I won't forget this," he said, then pressed the photo into my hand. "Take it, just in case you forget what you did." I looked down at the picture again. That smile, those missing teeth. "I won't forget," I whispered. He turned and made his way toward the lobby, shoulders hunched, vanishing into the sliding glass doors. I didn't wait. I had hours of road still ahead of me, and the weight of the decision was starting to settle on my chest. The drive back to the depot was a blur of wet highways, coffee stops that felt like guilt trips, and the growing certainty that I was already too late. The storm eased, but not my thoughts. By the time I pulled into the depot lot, dawn had begun to stain the sky, casting a gray light over the warehouse. I parked the rig and climbed down slowly. My legs were stiff. My face felt hollow. Inside, the air was buzzing. Someone must have seen me pull in, because heads turned when I entered the break room. One of the guys I barely knew nodded toward the hallway. "He's looking for you." No surprise. Another guy, older, leaned in just enough for his voice to carry. "I like you, Riley," he muttered. "But nobody survives Garrick. You're on your own." I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy. I dropped my bag by my locker and took a sip from a cold coffee I didn't remember leaving behind. I sat for a moment, listening to the distant clank of loading docks, forklifts beeping in reverse. Normal life going on. Then my phone buzzed. Garrick. My office. Now. I stared at the screen. My hand trembled, but I didn't feel scared. Not anymore. Somewhere between the chains and the photo, I'd stopped being afraid of what I'd lose. I'd made a decision out there on that road, and it had cost me time, possibly my job. But I could live with that. What I couldn't live with was pretending it hadn't mattered. Better to lose a paycheck than a piece of myself. I stood, brushed the water-stained knees of my pants, and walked toward the office like someone who finally knew what they stood for. I made the short walk to Garrick's office with shoulders square and spine stiff, pretending I wasn't soaked through, pretending I wasn't about to get fired. The hallway smelled like overused coffee machines and cheap disinfectant. Familiar smells, but they didn't comfort me anymore. He was already sitting behind his desk when I entered. His chair creaked under his weight, and a manila folder sat open in front of him. He didn't motion for me to sit. He never did. "Shut the door," he said without looking up. I did, carefully, and took 2 steps forward. He flipped through the papers with theatrical flair before pulling one out and slapping it down onto the desk. "You think this is a game?" I didn't answer. "You think you can take detours and play hero while I'm the one catching flack from upstairs?" Still, I said nothing. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of begging. "You missed your Chicago checkpoint by 4 hours. He jabbed the report with his finger. 4 hours. That shipment cost us 30 grand in late penalties. $30,000. He stood, now leaning over the desk toward me. "You cost me money, Riley. And let me make one thing clear. Around here, money is the only damn thing that matters." He paused, then scoffed and spit, just beside my boot, but deliberate. A message. "You're worthless trash," he said. "I should have fired you the minute you walked in." A few people walking past stopped just outside the doorway. I could see their shadows under the frosted glass panel. They'd heard every word. One of them laughed quietly. Another mumbled something I couldn't make out. No one opened the door. No one helped. "I'm writing you up," Garrick said. "You'll sign it, take your unpaid suspension, and if you're lucky, I won't blacklist your name from every logistics company within 2 states. Still, I didn't speak. He tossed a pen on the desk. "Sign it." I looked down at the paper. Disciplinary form. Final warning. I picked up the pen, Clicked it once. My name looked foreign as I wrote it, like it didn't belong on a document like this. When I finished, I placed the pen back carefully and met his eyes. "You're wrong about me," I said, voice calm. "But I'm not here to convince you." Garrick blinked, as if he hadn't expected me to say anything at all. I turned and walked out. My knees trembled slightly, but my steps didn't falter. The hallway felt longer this time. I passed the break room, the coffee station, the time clock, all the spots that made up my second home for the last 6 years. Eyes followed me as I walked past, but no one said a word. Outside, the sky had cleared, but the wind still bit. I pulled my coat tighter around me and made my way to my car. By the time I reached home, the daylight had faded. The house was quiet. Emily's backpack was hanging by the door, her little pink sneakers scattered near the mat. I sat on the couch, still wearing my coat, trying to breathe through the sting of what had just happened. That's when my phone buzzed again. It was a text from my cousin, Leah. Leah. "Hey, I heard from Callista you got fired for stealing time. What's going on? Are you okay?" My heart dropped. I opened our family group chat. "Callista, 1 hour ago. Sad to see how some people take advantage of a company's trust. Guess they always had trouble showing up on time, even as a kid." No one had responded to her. But no one had corrected her either. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I locked the phone and tossed it onto the coffee table. I got up and headed to the kitchen. As I poured myself a glass of water, my reflection caught in the window above the sink. I looked tired, older, smaller, like a shadow. That word again. It echoed, just like she had said it at the dinner. "In this family, you're just a shadow." I turned away from the window and took the glass with me into the bedroom. I changed out of my work clothes, folded them carefully, and placed them in the laundry basket. The quiet inside the house felt different tonight, more like judgment than peace. I laid on my back in bed, eyes wide open. Time didn't pass, it just hovered, thick and stagnant. The digital clock blinked at me. 11:03 p.m. I rolled to my side and pulled the blanket tighter. Where did I belong? Not at work, not in my own home, not even in my family. They had erased me in front of each other, and then in front of strangers, and no one had spoken up. Maybe they never saw me to begin with. But in that silence, something inside me started to burn. Not like anger, not like grief, something quieter, steadier. Resolve. If they wanted me gone, forgotten, dismissed, maybe I'd do the opposite. Maybe I'd show them exactly what they tried to erase. My phone buzzed again. I grabbed it from the nightstand, ready to ignore it. But the screen didn't show a message. It showed an email. Subject: urgent, mandatory meeting, New York headquarters. I sat up. My heart started thudding hard, steady. Something was shifting. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the subject line, letting the words sink into my chest. Mandatory. Meeting. New York. This wasn't over. It might just be starting. I didn't open the email right away. I just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at those words on the screen like they were written in another language. Mandatory meeting, New York headquarters. 3 words that could end everything or somehow change everything. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand, exhaled slowly, and got up. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My body ached from the tension of the past few days, and my mind felt like it was trying to protect me from thinking too far ahead. In the kitchen, the overhead light flickered slightly, same way it had for the past 2 winters. I didn't bother fixing it. It reminded me too much of how things in my life seem to just flicker, never burn steady. I sat down at the table, the one with a small scratch from when I tried to assemble it myself. A stack of unopened envelopes waited like an audience. I slid them toward me, one by one, opening each and laying them out like puzzle pieces. Electric bill, gas, internet, past due, final notice, disconnection warning. I didn't cry. I didn't even frown. I just began organizing them by due date, as if that small act could somehow make them more manageable. I reached over to the cabinet and grabbed the photo of my mother, her smile so familiar, her eyes always patient. I placed the frame gently on top of the bills. "If you were here, You'd probably tell me to breathe and figure it out one piece at a time, I whispered. But I didn't know how to figure it out this time. Just then, the front door creaked open. Aunt Leora? Emily's voice rang through the hallway. I forced a smile, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stood up. In here, sweetheart. She bounced in, her little legs quick across the linoleum floor. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she clutched something behind her back. Guess what today is? I smiled, genuinely this time. Your birthday, she squealed. You remembered! I knelt down and hugged her tightly. That small body against mine, full of warmth and hope, it broke me more than any bill could. She stepped back, eyes bright. Did you get the present you promised? That question hit harder than anything Garrick had said to me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to stay steady. I didn't, I said softly. Not yet. Things have been tricky. She tilted her head but didn't look disappointed. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It's okay. I made you one. It was a drawing, stick figures of the two of us holding hands, standing under a rainbow. In big crayon letters at the top, it read, You're my favorite grown-up. I hugged her again, tighter this time. Thank you, baby. I love it. She grinned. You're still coming to my party later, right? I wouldn't miss it. Just then, Callista's voice cut through the room like an icy draft. Some people can't even keep the smallest promises, she said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. I looked up slowly. It's not that simple, Callista, she scoffed. It never is with you, is it? Emily looked between us, sensing the shift, then slowly backed away toward the hallway. I'll go draw some more, she mumbled, before disappearing. Callista stepped into the kitchen, eyes fixed on the stack of bills, the photo of Mom on top. You should really start thinking about moving out, she said. This arrangement isn't permanent. I stood up. It never was. I'm just trying to get through the week. Always a victim, aren't you? I clenched my fists at my sides. You don't know anything about what I've been dealing with. She shrugged. I know what Leah told me, that you got fired for stealing company time. My heart dropped. That's not what happened. But it's what people are saying, she said casually. And you know how fast things spread. She poured herself a glass of water like we were having a polite conversation. I risked everything to help someone, I said, voice shaking. I made a choice I knew could cost me. And you take that and twist it into something ugly for what? So you can feel better about your perfect life? Callista set the glass down a little too hard. You've always had excuses, since we were kids, and honestly, I'm tired of pretending like you're some misunderstood hero. You just make bad choices and expect pity. No, I said. I make hard choices, and I live with them. We stared at each other for a moment, decades of silence and tension coiling between us like a frayed rope ready to snap. She turned without another word and walked out. I stood alone in that kitchen, the bills still spread out, the photo of my mother staring back at me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to curl into myself and disappear. But instead, I took a deep breath, picked up the drawing Emily had given me, and walked back to my room. I laid on my bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Bills I couldn't pay. A boss who saw me as a burden. A sister who seemed to delight in pushing me further down. And now I had let down the one person who believed in me. The idea of disappearing didn't feel so distant anymore, but just as I started to sink into that thought, I felt the paper in my hand. Emily's drawing. You're my favorite grown-up. That sentence pulled me back. I turned and reached for the phone. Opened the email. Mandatory meeting. New York headquarters. Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. Sharp. I whispered to myself, this is it. The end. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed with the phone on my chest, the screen dark, my mind flooded with worst-case scenarios. I kept picturing Garrick's face at that desk, how his words had spit venom straight into my skin, and now, Now I was being sent to headquarters in New York. Not just a phone call, not a write-up, a meeting, in person. By 5:30, I was sitting on the 6:12 a.m. train headed east. The world outside blurred through the window. Bare trees, cracked billboards, fog hanging low like it didn't want to lift. I hadn't been to the city in years. The last time was with my mom, before she got too sick to travel. I remembered her holding my hand as we walked through Grand Central, her voice full of wonder at the chandeliers. I tried to hold on to that image now, like armor. The train rattled over tracks that groaned under its weight. I clutched my coat tighter and kept my eyes on the buildings as we passed them. Row homes with paint peeling, boarded-up diners, abandoned gas stations. Each one whispered, "You're not built for this place." I pulled out my wallet and flipped it open. Tucked behind my ID was the photo of Mom. I stared at it, her smile familiar and calm. "Help me get through this," I whispered. Just this. 2 hours later, I stepped off the train into a swirl of cold wind and hard pavement. The city was already alive, honking horns, quick footsteps, cell phones glued to faces. I felt invisible again, like a ghost moving through bodies. I walked the 8 blocks to the corporate tower, my boots clicking against the concrete, hands stuffed deep into my pockets. When I reached the building, I looked up, and it nearly swallowed me whole. 50 floors of glass and steel, a monument to power. Inside, the lobby gleamed. Polished floors, an art installation that looked like it cost more than my yearly salary, people in suits with straight backs and practiced smiles. I kept my head down and approached the reception desk. "Leora Riley," I said quietly. "I have a 9 a.m. meeting." The woman behind the counter typed something, gave me a polite nod, and handed me a visitor badge. 29th floor, she said. Executive suite. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. As it rose, the numbers ticked up like a countdown to impact. When the doors opened, the air changed. Everything smelled like new carpet and money. The walls were lined with framed awards. There was a coffee bar in the corner with a machine I didn't know how to use. And there he was, Garrick, standing near the far wall, chatting with a man in a navy suit. When he saw me, his face shifted. Not surprise, not worry, smug, that same satisfied curl in his lip. "Riley," he said as he walked toward me. "Nice of you to show." I nodded stiffly. He lowered his voice as he stepped beside me. "Do us both a favor. Keep your mouth shut in there. Let me handle this. Maybe I can spin this into something that doesn't end with you on food stamps." My jaw clenched. I could feel the pulse behind my eyes. He kept going. "Look, you're not cut out for this company. You know it, I know it. But we can end this clean if you let me speak." I didn't respond. I just stared at the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. The city spread out like a map, indifferent and sprawling. He misread my silence as obedience. "Good," he said, patting me on the shoulder like I was a dog that had finally sat still. As he turned to walk back to the conference room, I reached into my coat pocket and touched the corner of Emily's drawing, folded neatly and tucked away. It grounded me, reminded me who I was walking in for. And then I remembered something else. Earlier that morning, as I'd grabbed my things from the locker at the depot, one of the guys, Dante, had passed by me. He wasn't someone I talked to often. Quiet, kept to himself. He'd paused by the door and said in a low voice, "You might be the one who ends him. We've all been waiting." At the time, I'd barely registered it. Now, those words echoed louder than Garrick's warnings. The assistant outside the boardroom stood up as we approached. "Mr. Warren will see you both now." I blinked. "Mr. Warren?" Before I could ask, the double doors swung open. I followed Garrick in, heart racing. The room was massive, long table, walls of glass, a view that stretched across the skyline. At the head of the table sat a silver-haired man in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable, and next to him, a chair, empty. I took a seat where they told me. Garrick settled in confidently, opening a leather folder like this was his show. I kept my hands folded, palms damp. The man, Mr. Warren I presumed, adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Garrick. We're here today to discuss the Chicago delivery, the penalties, the personnel involved. Garrick leaned forward, eager. Yes, sir. I've prepared a summary of the delay, the financial losses, and the disciplinary actions taken. I believe we handled the matter internally with appropriate, Mr. Warren raised a hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll want to hear from both of you. I didn't expect that. Garrick did. He grinned. Of course, But Mr. Warren turned to me. Ms. Riley, would you care to start? My throat went dry. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid they could hear it. But I swallowed, leaned slightly forward, and met his eyes. Yes, I said. I would. I stepped through the threshold, shoulders drawn and breath held, expecting polished indifference and cold glass stares, and I got that. But I also got something else. The room was vast. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, the kind that's meant to look expensive without trying. One wall was nothing but glass, a panoramic view of Central Park, stretching wide and still beyond it. Everything inside the room whispered money, power, silence, the kind of silence that didn't welcome you, it examined you. Garrick walked in like he owned the place. He adjusted his tie, greeted someone across the table with a tight grin, then settled into a chair without being asked. I hesitated. There were two empty chairs at the far end, one facing the boardroom, the other positioned slightly behind it, almost ceremonial, and then I saw him. Seated to the right of the company CEO, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit like it was sewn onto him, was the man from the road, the man I pulled out of a storm, who had clutched a photograph of a little girl and asked for warmth, not rescue. His silver hair was neatly combed and his cane rested against the side of his chair. His eyes, clear, unwavering, met mine as I stopped in my tracks. He gave the smallest nod. My legs moved on their own. I sat where they gestured, directly across from the CEO. I could feel Garrick's sneaking glances, wondering if I looked nervous enough to be crushed, but I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I was just waiting. The CEO cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Today's meeting was called to discuss the late delivery on the Apex Electronics shipment routed through Scranton. As you both know, the delay incurred a penalty of $30,000. Garrick leaned forward instantly, flipping open his leather folder. Yes, and I've documented the timeline and the corrective action taken on site, he said smoothly. Our driver, Miss Riley here, made an unauthorized stop in the middle of the route. I've submitted a formal disciplinary write-up and... The CEO held up a hand. Before we go further, I'd like to introduce someone. His eyes moved to the man beside him. This is Michael Warren. Some of you may know the name. As of last quarter, Mr. Warren's firm, Northbridge Capital, acquired majority shares in our company. He is now our largest stakeholder, and as of last week, chairman of the board. Garrick went still. The color drained from his face. And Warren? He looked directly at me. There was no performance in his eyes, no theatrics, just quiet steadiness. She didn't cost this company $30,000, he said clearly, addressing the room. She saved something money can't buy. My life. The silence hit harder than any shout ever could. I was stranded in the middle of a storm, he continued. Dead car, no signal. My family didn't even know where I was. If it weren't for this woman, he gestured to me, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I wouldn't have made it to my granddaughter's birthday. I wouldn't be standing behind a company that punishes people for choosing humanity. I didn't move. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, but I didn't blink. Not yet. Garrick opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His fingers tightened on the folder in front of him, but he didn't dare flip another page. The CEO leaned back. Mr. Warren asked that we review this incident not as a logistical error, but as a test of our corporate values. I agreed. Warren looked at Garrick now. His tone sharpened just enough to draw blood without raising his voice. You sat across from this woman, he said, and called her trash, for doing the kind of thing this world desperately needs more of. Garrick stammered. I wasn't aware of the full context. I acted within company protocol. Protocol? Warren repeated, voice colder now. Protocol doesn't excuse cruelty. It doesn't excuse humiliating someone who made a judgment call to save a life, my life. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another looked pointedly at Garrick, then quickly away. I kept my eyes on the tabletop. There was a tiny chip in the lacquered edge, barely noticeable, but it gave me something to focus on while the walls shook around us. Warren turned to me again. "You have nothing to apologize for, Ms. Riley." Then he faced Garrick once more. "But you do." The air dropped in temperature. "You owe her an apology," he said. "Right here, right now." Garrick swallowed hard. His face was ashen. He glanced around the table, as if searching for someone, anyone, to intervene. No one spoke. Not the CEO, not the assistant near the door. Not even the board member who had smiled when Garrick made his first remark. For the first time since I'd met him, Garrick looked small. He turned to me slowly, lips parted. And I waited, because this time, I wasn't the one who had to speak. He looked at me, his mouth slightly open, as if trying to form words he hadn't practiced. For the first time since I'd known him, Garrick was speechless. He stammered. "I didn't mean—" But the words didn't land. They hovered, weak and without weight, like dust caught in still air. "You owe her an apology," Warren repeated, slower this time. "Not to save face, not because I said so, but because it's the decent thing to do." Garrick's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes shifting from Warren to me, then back again. His lips trembled. "Ms. Riley," he began, voice barely above a whisper, "I apologize for how I handled the situation." I didn't move. He went on, flailing for something that would stick. It wasn't personal. I was following protocol. The delivery was late and— Warren raised a hand. "Stop." The room fell into silence again, heavier than before. "That wasn't an apology," he said firmly. "That was justification." Garrick sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath him. His shoulders sagged. His usual smugness had vanished. I stayed still, hands resting in my lap, my gaze locked ahead. I wasn't going to save him from this silence. Not anymore. After a pause, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small black notebook I carried every day. I'd never used it for much, just route notes, maintenance logs, driver reminders, but on the night of the storm, I had written everything down, not for defense, just to remember, because sometimes memory was all you had. I placed the notebook on the table and flipped to the page. Quietly, without drama, I turned it toward the CEO and slid it forward. "There," I said. "That's the timestamp, weather conditions, mile marker, description of the car, the man I helped, and why I stopped." The board members leaned forward. One of them pulled it closer, scanning the page. No emotion, just facts, truth written in ink. Warren took it last. He read it slowly. When he looked up, his jaw was tight. "You didn't just act with courage," he said. "You documented it. You knew someone would question your integrity." "I knew he would," I replied simply, nodding toward Garrick. Garrick's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. I've worked here for 17 years. I've delivered numbers, trimmed costs, cleaned up after drivers who couldn't even finish a route without screwing something up. And in that time," the CEO cut in sharply, "you also created a hostile work environment, manipulated internal records, and reallocated bonus funds intended for frontline workers." The room shifted. "What?" Garrick's voice cracked. "An internal audit began 3 weeks ago," the CEO continued, "prompted by anonymous complaints, most of which you suppressed before they reached corporate." Warren folded his hands. "We didn't just look at this one incident. We looked at your entire record. You've been running that depot like your personal kingdom and treating people like disposable tools." Garrick's chair scraped loudly as he stood. "You can't do this. I've done everything this company asked." "No," Warren said quietly. "You did everything that made you look good, but you forgot what leadership actually means." Security entered the room without a word. A man and a woman dressed in plain suits walked in and stood behind Garrick. Effective immediately, the CEO said. You're relieved of your duties. Your badge has been deactivated. Your belongings will be mailed. We'll be in contact regarding legal proceedings related to the bonus misappropriation. Garrick turned to me, disbelief in his eyes. You planned this, he hissed. You wanted this to happen. I didn't say a word, because I didn't plan this. I survived him. As security escorted him out, the silence in the room remained thick. No one clapped, no one smiled. But no one looked sorry. Warren turned back to me. Would you give us a moment, Ms. Riley? I nodded and stepped out of the room. The hallway felt cooler now, lighter. A few minutes later, I was in the elevator, descending slowly, the ground returning to me one floor at a time. I passed the lobby without a glance and stepped out into the cold air of the city. A light drizzle had started, just enough to streak my coat. I walked for blocks, not caring where. Somewhere between the rhythm of my boots and the honks of taxis, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just walked. Hours later, in a low-rent apartment building on the edge of town, Garrick sat alone. His suit was rumpled. The blinds were drawn. He hadn't opened the mail on the table. Among the envelopes was a letter stamped, "Court summons" in red ink. He poured himself a drink with a shaky hand and stared blankly at the wall. He was still trying to figure out how he'd lost control, how a woman he thought was silent, insignificant, and small had burned the whole illusion to the ground without ever raising her voice. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. The city buzzed below, but I heard only the words Warren had said before I left the boardroom. Now, let's talk about your future. I followed Warren back into the room, this time without fear crawling up my spine. The board had cleared out. The tension had gone with them, but something more profound remained, quiet reverence, like the air after a thunderstorm. Warren didn't sit right away. He walked to the head of the table where Garrick had tried to plant his authority not an hour earlier and lifted a pen case from the polished surface. He opened it, then stepped toward me and extended it like he was handing over something sacred. This pen's been with me for 30 years, he said, his tone low but deliberate. I've used it to sign million-dollar deals, fire people who earned it, and promote those who never saw it coming. He pressed it gently into my hand. Don't use it for contracts. Use it for people, he added. This pen signs people, not profits. I trust you to lead with it. I didn't speak. My fingers closed around the weight of it, sleek, black lacquer, capped with a gold trim that caught the light. I didn't need to say thank you. I just nodded because he saw me, fully, not as a liability, not as a delay, as a leader. 2 weeks later, I returned to the Scranton Depot, not as the woman Garrick barked orders at, but as the new manager. I'd expected resistance, whispers behind backs, arms folded in corners, and I got some of that. But what I didn't expect was the cautious hope in people's eyes when they realized I wasn't just another carbon copy of the old system. On my first day, I left the office door open. I didn't stay behind it. I made rounds across the warehouse floor, sat next to a driver eating lunch alone, helped a junior dispatcher reboot his system, even stepped out to the lot to check on a truck's broken taillight with the mechanic team. I asked questions, real ones. How are you sleeping? What's your toughest route? What's something you wish management understood? I listened. And when they told me, I didn't flinch. On Friday, I called a short all-staff meeting. Nothing formal, just 20 of us standing in a half circle near the loading dock, the scent of coffee and diesel lingering in the air. I cleared my throat. I know things have been hard. And I know this place wasn't built to listen to you. That ends now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a printout. This is a new policy approved by corporate this morning. It's called the Good Samaritan Rule. Some heads tilted. A few exchanged glances. If a driver stops on the road to help someone in real, verifiable need, and that act causes a delay, I continued, they won't be punished. They'll be thanked. And they'll get a bonus. The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was stunned relief. A mechanic near the edge of the group crossed his arms, nodded slightly, then muttered, "About time." I smiled. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again. The same spot where the bills once towered. The stack was smaller now. Not gone, but manageable. I'd called the utility company last week and worked out a payment plan. I canceled the extra subscription services, ate more grilled cheese, less takeout, but I was sleeping better. Healing didn't come with a paycheck or a new title. It came with every conversation I had where I looked someone in the eye and didn't feel like I had to shrink. It came every time I drove by a broken-down car and didn't feel like ignoring it. Of course, the family didn't change overnight. Callista still hadn't called. She'd sent a vague text the week Garrick was terminated, something like, "Heard things shook up, hope it wasn't too messy." I didn't answer, but Emily did. The following Monday, I picked her up from school like I used to before everything fell apart. She ran up to me, ponytail bouncing, backpack half open. "I made you something," she chirped, pulling a folded piece of construction paper from her pocket. Inside was a drawing of a stick figure with a ponytail standing next to a truck. Big block letters above the scene read, "You're my hero." I looked down at it for a long moment. My eyes burned. I swallowed and hugged her close. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. We went home. She ran off to play, and I walked into the living room, took down the photo of Mom, and gently leaned the card against the frame. For the first time, I said to myself, I believe it too. Later that evening, I sat on the back porch with a mug of tea in my hands. The sky was purple, touched with orange. Crickets sang low in the grass. I looked out at the yard, the chipped fence, the neighbor's dog sniffing along the edge like always. And I thought about the path I'd taken, muddy, narrow, thankless. I remembered every name I was called, every time I was ignored, talked over, dismissed. I remembered the night I pulled over and changed everything, and how close I came to never doing it. They called me worthless. But worth is not given, it's proven, in storms, in silence, in choices. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can lead to the biggest turning point of your life. Leora didn't fight back with anger. She stood her ground with integrity. And in the end, the truth spoke louder than power ever could. What would you have done in her place? Would you risk everything to do what's right? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories just like this.